Hi, my name is Eda320, and I really like tanks. So much so, in fact, that I've decided to embark on a journey across the internet and gaming world alike to find some of the wackiest, coolest, and best made tanks in video games. I'll be looking at everything from the plausibly realistic to the downright insane.
Then the idea is that you want it to be able to pop smoke and get away, because it's not really supposed to get into a scrap with either other tanks or, I would say, infantry, but I mean, we battle alien hive mind bugs and essentially demon wizards, so I'm not quite sure when the term infantry no longer applies, and now we're talking about hordes.
So if this sounds like something you're interested in, stick around and listen up, because this is a Tank Enthusiast Reacts to Tanks in Video Games.
Oh man, my damn tank sticker. I can't wait for this to fall off during the recording. It's going to, but it's going to be really funny, so it's okay. If it's for the funny, then it all works out. Greetings, ladies and worms, and welcome back to what is a long overdue episode of Tank Enthusiast Reacts. The Warhammer 40k franchise as a whole is something that I've had a lot of requests to do over the years. This little episode is also doubling as a nice and convenient 40,000 subscribers celebration for the channel. You didn't forget, did you, that we hit 40,000 subscribers like, oh, I actually have a watch, but I'm not wearing it, a month and a half ago, maybe, something like that? You guys don't remember? I remember. I haven't forgotten. Thank you so much to everyone for subscribing and for supporting. I mean, I think that's worthy of saying, obviously, with this being a milestone. If you like what you see and you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and do that, because it really seriously helps me out a lot. Do all that other fun YouTube stuff that will help boost me in the algorithm and help us get closer and closer to these big goals, moments like this. Also, just to get it out of the way at the beginning of the video, if you also want to support me on Patreon, it's really also helped me out a lot. You help pay for trips to places. Actually, I'm going to be taking a trip pretty soon as of this video's upload. Again, not wearing a watch. You also get videos early, you get extended cuts of the videos, and you get a special channel on the Discord where you get to talk to me and your fellow money wasters. Anyways, I've been rambling on just a little too much for this intro. Let's jump right in and take a look at some of the tanks of Warhammer.
Those foul gargoyles pollute the skies!
The Tyranids have the orbital guns.
They do! These unrelenting attacks make a counteroffensive difficult.
We shall take care of that.
You, go with him!
We will assist in the defense.
So off the bat, we have what I'm pretty sure is referred to in common Warhammer parlance as the Leman Russ tank. Leman Russ, I'm sure there's a correct way to pronounce it, and I'm sure I'm not doing it. Obviously, off the bat, quick disclaimer out of the way, I am not a Warhammer 40k nerd historian guy. I know most of the key points though. God Emperor, the Warp, the different gods, Chaos. I've played the campaign of Space Marine 2 all the way through, so whatever they talk about in there, that's pretty much the extent of my Warhammer knowledge. So right away, I think there's something pretty obvious that strikes me about the layout of the Imperium's tanks in the Warhammer 40k universe, and that is their general resemblance to the land ships of the First World War. I don't think that this is a coincidence. I think very much with the meat grinder, dirty, filthy, over the top, everything with as many guns as possible, and the just absolute most like hellish nightmare war that you could possibly think of. And the First World War is not a bad place to start. Not to say, of course, that Warhammer 40k is somehow based on the First World War, but although despite saying that, kind of the only thing that really gives off this vibe is the silhouette of the tracks. Typical land ship like this. Yes, I know I'm not cool enough to have actual model kits. I have little Kobe Legos. I call it a trapezoid. I don't think it is a trapezoid. It's not. Rhomboid tracks, that's it. The tracks encompass the entire hull, so to speak. This was a result of what tanks were designed for in the First World War, which is to, say, trench crossing. The idea was that you had these big, deep trenches, expansive trench networks, and also massive craters to get across no man's land, right? These things had to make it through incredibly tough conditions that honestly, even with these designs, they weren't really suited for. The conditions of the First World War were honestly such that even tanks that were specifically designed to traverse them often didn't do very well. Of course, famously, the big tank out of the First World War, the Renault FT, does not use this track design. I mean, this is essentially the tank that out of World War I, everyone says this is the future and this is what we're doing. And yeah, so even during these big, muddy trench environments, vehicles like this were being designed and used and served pretty well. Also, I knew this was going to fall off during the video. I will replace it in a little bit. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to go without it for now. What I mean by this whole side tangent is that even during the First World War, and especially afterwards, the idea of tracks that have to encompass the entire silhouette of the hull kind of go away. Now that I'm really thinking about it, the rhomboid style tanks with the tracks that wrap all the way around are probably there for the sponsons. If you're gonna have these ginormous sponson guns, the tracks kind of have to go all the way up and around. There's not really much other way to do that. Now, some of the tanks in Warhammer, as we'll see here in a minute, do have these sponson mounted guns, so that makes sense. However, some of the tanks in Warhammer don't, and it may or may not beg the question, why wouldn't that change between the two designs? Design commonality, parts interchangeability, maybe? It's gotta probably just be the design language. I think generally speaking, there's a theme in Warhammer that technology has progressed, but only in weirdly specific areas, and in other weirdly specific areas, technology has not progressed. In fact, I think in some ways it's actually regressed, clearly. And it could just be some sort of design philosophy that for whatever reason in Warhammer they think needs to be adhered to. It may have spawned from the fact that a lot of these tanks had sponsons, and so the tracks had to go all the way around. Even once they removed the sponsons for future designs, they say, well, the tracks are still going to go all the way around because that's just always how it's been done. That's always how we've built tanks, and that's what a tank is supposed to do. That's what it's supposed to look like. I'm going to go ahead and isolate that. I'm going to put that down as my official theory for why, even without sponsons, these Warhammer tanks seem to have all-encompassing tracks. Not just the shapes, but also the fact that these Leman Russ tanks seem to have a straight ripoff of the British emblem insignia, that white, red, and white stripe. I do believe it's to represent the flag of England. Please pardon me, my World War I history is a tad rusty. Just a pretty ubiquitous paint job given to the rhomboidal British tanks of the First World War. So it's kind of interesting to see it here because I'm not sure if it means anything in 40K. Like, I'm not sure if white and red is like a specific color of the Imperium or of a specific unit. I think that kind of stuff, those little quirks, are really fun. It may very well be a conscious nod from, say, the developers, or I guess in this case, the guys who made Warhammer, them being like, yes, this is an obvious reference to World War I British rhomboid tanks. I do love to see the details on these tanks are actually really good. Like, they actually seem to have many functional components. There's sort of vents on some of these side panels. There's like panels within the panels that I'm sure hides some maybe electricals and things, because as we're about to get into, these tanks are a little bit more advanced than a traditional World War I land ship. Some very cool details with chains mounted on the front of the tank for towing, heavy lifting, things like that. More ladder rungs for crew to climb up onto the front of the tank as well as on the sides, which is important. You know, you gotta be able to get up on your tank in multiple angles. And even details like mud chutes for allowing mud to scrape off the tracks. And mud chutes like that are gonna be more necessary when you have paneling that encompasses and covers all of the tracks. We also have a great look on the front of the track here, what is clearly a reference to a track tensioning system, which the Chieftain would be so proud to see that. And I love details like this. Again, like a track tensioning system, panels and doors that clearly have purpose, handlebars for climbing up onto the tank, mud chutes even, like all of these very functional pieces of the tank. It's sort of that visual storytelling of how something might work. I think clearly that shows that they've used real tanks for references in many different ways, although there's a lot of shapes and geometries that maybe don't quite line up with any specific tank. All of the pieces are there. I mean, even the turret has what looks like a pretty good representation of what could be a cupola. Although on this particular tank, almost looks like it has cutouts for where periscopes would go, but doesn't. And I think the only vision for this is on the front, where there's one bit of glass on the front. But yeah, this cupola is looking a bit lackluster to me, but good acknowledgement that it's there, and there's a hinge and everything. It looks like it opens properly. Like, I know this seems like very basic criteria, but you'd be surprised how many fictional tanks you find out there that don't follow these very, very basic, visual storytelling elements. Definitely worth noting that the turret here is very clearly welded, and it's got these giant, thick plates. So this thing must have some pretty heavy armor, especially, I mean, just for a turret to be this heavily armored. I can only imagine how thick the hull is, although we can see references sort of how thick some of the armor plating on here might be. I really love the detail on the weld lines, the weld seams on this. Looks really good. I think there's an interesting dichotomy where it seems like the turret is welded, but the hull looks like it's riveted. I know it's Warhammer, I know technology is supposed to be behind in certain ways, but riveting, like, really? Like, I know that it's supposed to be, that's the whole aesthetic, but to go all the way back to riveting is insane. And that's a technology where that's not hard to get past. Although, well, actually, if you ask the British, Germans, and Americans in the late 1930s, it is a very difficult thing to pass. The fact that they seem to know how to do welding here for the turret, but then they can't be bothered to weld the hull, or maybe it's a manufacturing thing. It could be a manufacturing thing. Depending how the tank is constructed, welding can take up a lot of man hours. It may very well be quicker in certain circumstances to just rivet the tank. Surface level glance, it seems odd to me that the hull of the tank would be riveted and the turret would be welded. Then again, concern for crew safety does not strike me as anything that I don't even think crew and safety appear in the same sentences in the Warhammer 40k universe. We even see attention to detail on the front with the sort of T-34 style hatch on that slope front plate. Obviously, we know nowadays that if you're going to do a sloped front plate, that is like the worst possible hatch solution, I think, maybe of all time. T-34, great tank, but that hatch is terrible. Let's be honest with ourselves. But I also think what is really interesting about this particular tank is its main armament being a laser cannon, almost like a sort of burst fire laser cannon. At least here in the game, it seems to be firing in bursts of 3 to 5. Laser weapons in a tank is a very interesting idea, and I'm not sure how in Warhammer what sort of the difference is between laser weapons and kinetic projectiles, and sort of what the pros and cons are of each. I guess maybe for something meant to deal with infantry targets, lasers make a certain amount of sense. There also seems to be on the back, oh, there's even, I think those are spare road wheels, I think, even mounted on the side. Oh, that's really cool. I didn't even notice that when I was looking at this originally, but yeah, there's a little bracket there for, like, looks like spare road wheels, which is really cool. Again, a more, like, really cool attention to detail that show that these are real lived-in vehicles. Like, they've thought about a lot of things, and I really appreciate that about these tanks. This large back door on the tank looks like the place where potentially infantry would go. So I'm not sure if that's just a massive engine in a massive engine compartment and all that space is being taken up, or if that genuinely is supposed to be sort of a big empty area with seats for infantry, dismount infantry to be in. I suppose there's always room for the answer to be both, that both the engine is in there and also crew members are expected to climb in through that back and kind of go on the either side of the engine, which of course is very much harkening back to the land ships of the First World War, where the engine sat in the middle of the tank and everyone just had to do this dance around it in order to operate the tank. There is evidence for that as well with the fact that this tank has 6 flamethrowers mounted on rear sponsons. That is certainly one way to keep infantry off of your tank's back, although I question the effectiveness of putting 3 flamethrowers all together in a row, sort of covering the same area. I would personally think that maybe 1 or 2 flamethrowers maximum on each side would be necessary. 3 seems a little bit overkill, but of course, what is Warhammer if not overkill? I am curious what the total crew capacity for these tanks are supposed to be, because on one hand, these tanks are quite spacious. I would imagine you clearly have a driver, as you have a driver's hatch on the front, and of course, I mean, someone has to drive the tank. You have a hull-mounted gun of some sort. I believe that's going to be like a projectile firing cannon gun, not so much a laser gun like the main turret is, but someone's got to operate that, and then potentially even a loader for it as well, unless somehow they've streamlined the ammunition feed mechanisms for these sort of things, and it's either belt fed or magazine, and the same guy who's operating it can also feed it magazines. And then I would say maybe a minimum of 2 crew members in the turret, because you clearly need a commander. And then I would say the other guy would be a gunner, because as a laser weapon, I can't imagine it would need a reload. There's no cartridges, there's nothing really to feed. At worst, the gun might overheat and then you just cool it down. Or again, maybe there's a battery you swap, but I don't think you would need a dedicated guy for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this tank would have a crew, an operating crew of 4, and then I guess however many guys fit in the back. I do like to see that on the destroyed tank models that there's actually care and attention given to this. It's not just the normal tank model missing a few bits and painted black like charred remains. There's the tracks have fallen off and we've opened it up and we can see inside the tracks. I just appreciate when detail is put into the destroyed tanks in games, not just sort of the intact ones. Also, what I said earlier about there not being much visibility at the back, I do see there are 2 little periscopes up above the rear door. So there's definitely meant to be crew. The crew members are definitely supposed to be able to run around in the back. So the engine must be a lot smaller than I'm thinking it is. Love to see the barrels of the flamethrowers are like all bent because they've been heated up and like almost melted. All like the hinges on things are popped. Oh, there's even periscopes. There's even periscopes behind each of the flamethrowers too. So each flamethrower has its own periscope. Maybe those are crew members. Maybe that's not people in the back that are supposed to be like dismounts. Those might actually be like full proper crew members of this tank, be communicating directly with the commander, spotting targets and helping eradicate the Emperor's enemies. We do also get to see another variant of this Leman Russ tank as this sort of like quad cannon. I'm not sure what caliber those are, but knowing Warhammer, probably super, super big. I'm gonna assume this is an anti-aircraft variant because it looks to me like this sort of configuration is pretty much always an anti-aircraft vehicle. But this thing looks really cool, by the way. This thing actually almost looks like a real tank that actually could exist. The turret is so much bigger, it makes it look more like a normal tank. I'm not sure how or why, but all mounted on sort of the hull that we saw from the tank earlier. So they are completely reusing the body and the tracks and the hull, and although the back looks way different, there's definitely a lot of changes here to the engine area. I think there's also optics, there's nice lights on the front of the turret, looks like a white light on the front, like a big spotlight, and then possibly, I'm not sure what the green and the red lights are supposed to be, but I would imagine rangefinders and sensors and probably an infrared lamp of some kind, or at the very least like one of the glasses like an infrared scope, something like that. Again, I'm sure you can tell modern tanks are also not really my specialty. These tanks seem to be a hilarious mismatch of like World War I and modern day, and of course those are my 2 sort of weak points as a tank enthusiast, so I'm going to start listing off technologies without actually knowing how they work. I find it interesting that the bow cannon gun thing is kept on this tank. Oh, it even has a little, it even has a little optic of its own. See, again, like these small details where it's like, oh yeah, like we have to think about how that guy manning that gun actually sees. Oh, these guns, the quad guns are rifled too, which is really cool. I love to see the detail of rifling down the barrels of tank guns and large caliber guns that are modeled in video games, or actually even small arms. If they go through the effort of modeling rifling, I think that is dope. And there's even the really, really cool detail of 3 little pops for smoke launchers right above the bow gunner's position. So also really, really, really cool. It's not there on the normal tank. Interesting. I'm not sure why this tank does, but the other one doesn't. I suppose maybe if this really is like an anti-aircraft tank, then the idea is that you want it to be able to pop smoke and get away, because it's not really supposed to get into a scrap with either other tanks or, I would say, infantry, but I mean, we battle alien hive mind bugs and essentially demon wizards, so I'm not quite sure when the term infantry no longer applies, and now we're talking about hordes. Either way, in the chaos of Warhammer 40k, I could imagine that any combinations of things that kill other things is going to be appreciated. So yes, we have a tank that fires lasers out of its main gun and has 6 flamethrowers, but can we also get a tank that has 4 quad autocannons? Yeah, sure, send it. We want it.
Let's give him a taste of Cadian wrath. Guardsmen, honor your emperor with great pleasure, my lord.
Now, this is one big mama. I always pictured the tanks in Warhammer as being quite small, and I think it's mostly because I've seen them as miniatures, or even what we were just looking at with us as the Space Marine, we're almost as tall as the tank. I mean, like I kind of already said, whereas this thing is absolutely massive. I cannot imagine how heavy it must be, but it seems pretty dang maneuverable for what it is. Now, this one is a lot closer to the rhomboid style British World War I tanks to the other one, mostly for the fact that this one actually has sponson guns. Again, in real life, there is an idea of having too many guns. I know maybe that sounds heretical for multiple reasons. Number one would, for me, be crew. You need someone to operate each of these guns, and so when you start tacking on all these different guns, and then you need positions for the crews to sit in to operate the guns, and when you add more crew, you need space for the crew, and more space means more armor, and it starts becoming this never-ending spiral. But in Warhammer here, size seems not to matter. In fact, it seems to be encouraged. And with size comes space to put more guns, so why not? And once again, I think in a universe like Warhammer, where rather than worrying about squads and platoons, we're worried about hordes, we need things that can put massive amounts of pain and hate in literally every direction, as much as possible. I just think it's really cool how these little sponsons above the guns and the sponsons are smoke launchers. I'm a huge fan of smoke launchers, maybe because I play too much War Thunder sometimes. I think generally seeing them recognized and modeled in video games is very, very cool. The driver's hatch on this tank seems to be slightly different than the one on the previous tank that we saw. Had a pretty traditional hatch. I mean, it really honestly looked exactly like ripped straight from the T-34 with glass, like a periscope, whereas this seems to have a little camera spotting apparatus, a feed to, I suppose, a screen that the driver looks through. Now, there are pros and cons to this. If the driver and the camera are, say, separated by armor, if the camera goes out, there's not really anything you can do about that. Now, of course, there can be backup secondary cameras, or, of course, within this ginormous cast housing that this camera seems to sit in, there could be a system of, if the camera goes down, underneath it, there could be a little hatch that someone can open and they can take the camera and pull it down, and then maybe there's spare cameras and you put them up and then set it up. So that very much could very well make my point moot. But I think in today's world, at the very least, there's sort of what I would imagine as the downside of a camera versus a periscope. And I would imagine also periscopes would always be cheaper than cameras. In reality, this probably doesn't matter at all. Look, I'm a World War II tank buff, so I'm team periscopes. Not saying that cameras, or at the very least, if you've got cameras, periscopes should be there for a backup. Point being, I'm not sure if just a camera for your driver in this Warhammer tank is such a good idea. The gun on this larger tank also appears to be much larger than the laser gun on the previous Leman Russ tank that we saw. I genuinely don't know the caliber of this, but like it seriously must be. I mean, I'm gonna guess like 200 to 300. Like that is a seriously massive barrel. I think you could seriously fit an Imperial Guardsman down that barrel. Also, it seems to have a muzzle device on the end. So I can only imagine that rather than being a laser cannon, this seems to me like it's probably a genuine kinetic cannon. Because, of course, the main purpose of a muzzle brake being recoil mitigation. I suppose maybe with a laser gun, there's some argument as to it being maybe like heat dissipation or something, but as far as I know, muzzle brakes have never really been about heat dissipation, and more so about recoil mitigation. The front gun on the hull-mounted bow gun on this tank being used, and it is a kinetic projectile machine gun. Or rather, I guess, bolter cannon, maybe. I guess that is a good question. Would these larger caliber guns on these tanks be bolters, or would they be regular machine guns? I guess I can't imagine why they wouldn't be bolters. The big downside of a bolter, to me, seems that like they would be way too recoil intensive for the average Imperial Guardsman to handle, and only Space Marines are tough enough to handle bolter guns. But if the gun is mounted in a tank, then I mean, recoil is basically not an issue. It again makes me wonder what the benefit of lasers are compared to bolters, because I feel like for a tank, if a majority of your targets are infantry, kinetic projectiles with the potential for high explosive damage effect, that seems to me like a no-brainer. Like either having, I don't know if bolter projectiles are large enough to fit any kind of explosive payload in them, and so you can get like HE shells with your bolter machine guns. I feel like a high explosive shell out of a larger caliber cannon would always be more effective than a burst from a laser. Welcome back to Ed320, the channel where I don't know anything about lasers. I still currently am yet to be convinced that lasers or plasma would be the better anti-tank or infantry option. Again, see reference high explosive shells.
I've sustained heavy damage. I think we found our exit. Relay.
I do love these moments in the campaign where, you know, we don't just see the one flashy cool tank for that one part of this one mission. As we're going through the campaign, we're seeing these tanks traveling along with us, and as we're fighting, they're overwatching our positions and holding the enemy back while we deal with the breakthrough, and it makes this feel like a real living, breathing war. And I also like how the tanks, like, they're definitely there, and there's lots of them, but they are also kind of sparsely laid out. For every 100 soldiers, you see, you know, 1 or 2 of these big tanks. I like that. It makes them feel special when they arrive, but also not crazy rare, like, oh, you never see them.
The stink. Oh, you know this lad. These bastards can poison you with their stench alone. Empress safe. Watch your tongue, guardsman. My lord, forgive me.
Love to see this convoy of tanks rolling across. It's really cool to see, like, a bunch of different versions all built on the same chassis, because I mean, not only is it a nice developer shortcut of, hey, we already have the base model of the tank, let's just, you know, reconfigure it, but it also, that's how it is in real life. Yeah, we use the same chassis and we just build new variants of tanks on already existing hulls and running gears and proven tank chassis. It works on multiple levels, and I'm really happy to see it here. Also, shout out to that tank busting through that door where they turned the turret around over the back of the hull. That is correct procedure. You want to do that so that you do not damage your barrel while you're going through whatever obstacle you're going through.
Unite the most fearsome, tenacious, and relentless bloody men and women that ever crossed the stars.
Now, if I didn't think the tanks in Warhammer could get any bigger, they seem to have a personal vendetta to prove me wrong, because holy mackerel. If I can pardon my French, please excuse my foul language, but holy mackerel. I mean, this is quite literally a super tank. I mean, this is basically the Char 2C, if it was actually good. I'm not even sure if this thing is a Leman Russ at this point, but it is badass. I gotta say, this thing is cool. I'm usually not a big fan of tanks that have like 1,000,000 guns, and especially like land ships and things with like 6 different turrets and all this, but this thing, you cannot deny it. This thing looks metal as fuck. It looks, weirdly enough, like a more traditional tank. But don't get it twisted, this thing is far from traditional, especially in the sheer amount of guns that it has. There are sponson guns, and then on top of the sponson guns, there are little turrets. I don't know how many hours I want to spend trying to deduce how that might function. It seems like we have I would imagine is going to be a laser cannon on the turret roof there, and then 2, count them, 2 bolters. I definitely recognize those as bolters in a little rotatable sponson position, and I can't imagine, there's got to be one guy in there, right? That does not look big enough to fit more than one dude. Even that sponson, I mean, as big as this tank is, that sponson still looks, it's kind of small. I can only imagine you'd have the guy in there operating the turret, and then he crouches down and operates the bolters. I really don't know. Now, having one crew member kind of have to jump back and forth between operating multiple guns is not unheard of, specifically actually in the M2 medium tank where you had the 4 sponson guns, 2 sponson guns on each side. There was actually one crew member for those machine guns. It's a lot. It's not unheard of, but that's a lot. Also, you have a main cannon, which I think looks even bigger than the one on the previous big boy Leman Russ tank that we had seen. Somehow each step up with these tanks makes the previous one look like a toy in comparison. I'm gonna assume that this one is a much larger caliber than what we saw on the previous Leman Russ. It looks like we have a coaxial aligned autocannon, which also, believe it or not, is not unheard of, but this is the only coaxial on this vehicle, and it looks, by comparison to the main gun, it looks like a normal intermediate caliber machine gun. We have another hull-mounted cannon, I'm gonna say a bow gun, on the front, which seems to be a standard option for all the tanks in this universe. But this one seems to be what I'm gonna say is a howitzer because of how short the barrel is, but the barrel is damn near big enough to be a full-blown artillery piece. There have to be multiple people operating this hull-mounted gun because the ammunition must be ginormous. I mean, not just the casing, but surely this is a two-piece ammunition because I have no idea how else. Unless there's an autoloader in here somewhere, but then where does the guy who operates it sit? I guess he's maybe behind it and the autoloader is below it? I'm really trying to make this work, and I really don't know how it does. And the icing on the cake, the driver, who now seems to have a really, really small hatch on the front, and it's a direct vision periscope this time, or at the very least a glass. It might actually be direct vision. It might not be a periscope. The driver of his own has a turret above him, with of course two bolters at his disposal. I mean, again, in the Warhammer universe where you're going up against hordes and interdimensional demons, I can see how the more guns the merrier. But the sheer amount of crew coordination on this thing must be abysmal. Astronomical, I suppose, is the word I should have used first. The bow gun, it sounds weird calling it a bow gun, because when I think of a bow gun, I'm thinking of a machine gun. The bow cannon, that needs to have a loader. I highly doubt it's an auto loader, because this is Warhammer, after all. So I think there's two people that have to operate that, and where the gunner sits, I have no clue. And then the turret has both an astronomically large caliber main gun and a coaxial autocannon, so the ammunition for that, God knows where it's stored as well. And that's another thing I have, a qualm that I have with tanks like this that have all these multiple guns. It might be okay if you have multiple guns on your tank, but when you start breaking into multiple calibers, multiple different kinds of guns, you run into what I would imagine would be a very significant ammunition stowage problem, where if you need to have all these different ammo racks throughout the tank with all these different calibers, and the different calibers are going to be different sizes, so ammo stowage isn't going to be universal. Fitting like 20 rounds of ammo for your main gun is going to take up like 40 or 50 rounds worth of space for your coaxial autocannon here. It's going to be very disproportionate. To feed your larger caliber guns, you have to massively sacrifice on ammo for your smaller caliber guns. And when you have like 4 or 5 different calibers, you're going to have at least one of those guns that is severely lacking in shells. Shout out, at least we seem to have a proper all-round vision cupola, although because I really have to be that much of an asshole, it seems to me like this actually maybe has too many periscopes. That is a freaking lot to keep track of, but I mean, I guess it's going to give you really good vision. And the commander also seems to have a machine gun at his disposal, so as if this thing didn't have enough guns. Honestly, this is going to sound a bit out of character for me, but I think that machine gun position up top should be a bolter, because again, why not? If it's strapped to the tank, then why not have it be a big boy? I do love, I know it's often a theme in Warhammer how things are like all, you know, religious and churchy and thing, but I do have to give a massive shout out to the church aesthetics of this tank, including on the superstructure just above the hull, we have what look like church window vision optics, and then the back of this tank with the exhaust and everything just straight up looks like a church organ, and it even has like the church window shape at the back. Like, it looks so good. And all the other minor details are fantastic. All of the oil/fuel drums strapped to the back. Yeah, I can only imagine this thing eats fuel. The stowage bin on the back of the turret. Again, the proper implementation of the all-round cupola. Oh, actually, this thing has 2 cupolas, just noticed. The second one seems to have less optics, but still vision optics, so good considerations there. The tracks and sprockets that look totally good, although each individual track link is massive. I think each of those track links is almost the size of a freaking Imperium soldier. That is crazy. I can only imagine seeing this thing in real life. And like that, look at how thick that armor is. My goodness, great. It's literally thicker than Bro's head. That is insane. That is crazy. I guess in a world with no composite armor, we kept doing things the old-fashioned way, and you just made it thicker. Shout out ladders for crews to climb up onto. I love little things like that. Ladders and rungs and handholds and things for crew to get up onto the tanks. I love those little attention to detail. Shout out the hinges on the bottom of the skirts, so you can open up, you can lift those skirts up and gain access to the road wheels. Shout out dual smoke launchers on the front. Those will give you very nice coverage. And shout out the lamp, the massive spotlight on the left cheek there. That looks really freaking cool. Of course, you shouldn't need that if your tank has infrared fighting capabilities or any night vision above the 1950s and 60s, but this is Warhammer, so I guess maybe your enemy's IR capabilities are not necessarily what you're worried about, because they are, well, in this specific instance, an alien hive mind. Probably don't have access to infrared.
Ancient marks of the ruinous powers, etched by fools, long before the Great Crusade illuminated this world.
These were not made by devotees of the war.
How do you know?
You may soon see for yourself.
Really cool to see as well. In the world, we get just so much really cool world building, and I guess this is what Warhammer is so good at. Mining vehicles built on... It looks like they're built on Leman Russ chassis, or at the very least they're reusing the rhomboid tracks for this drilling equipment. This is totally 100% something that happens in the real world, especially the one that I can think of is after World War II, a lot of old Sherman tanks and Grant tanks, M3 tanks like down in Australia, repurposed for farm equipment because tank tracks make for pretty good tractors, which is funny because that's where tanks came from. The concept of Caterpillar tracks for tanks came from agricultural tractors. Tanks have their literal ethnic roots in agricultural tractors. So for a post-war industry to pop up of turning tanks back into tractors is very fun and cool, in my opinion, and a little ironic, maybe is the word. You would also get situations where tank parts, differential and the transmission and the sprockets and the running gear and the tracks, and you would plop that onto like a custom bespoke hull, and then you would make a tractor out of it just using tank parts. Even today, we've seen like old T-55s and Centurions being repurposed into farm equipment. So something like this, like, not only reflects reality, but also builds on this world, that these old military tank parts are also being used for this purpose in this world, just as it is in ours. Shout out on here, it seems like these tanks have received the blessing from the Adeptus Mechanicus. They got decals on here that is all written in 0s and 1s. And I don't have time to translate this right now live on camera, so I will give you this binary translation right now. Hopefully that is something funny or cool or informative. I don't know what that says. We'll find out. Editing Edda, we'll find out. Also, shout out that little number 56. I don't know what that number 56 is. Is that like, this is like the 56th drill or what? But I love administrative decals. I love little numbers and like serial numbers and or like unit markings, or like I love that little stuff. And so especially when that detail is paid to for fictional tanks, it really gets me going. And speaking of, wow, I actually totally forgot about this. Speaking of, yeah, tank parts being repurposed for agricultural or more commercial equipment, this right here is like directly what I was talking about. We have these little these little movers down here in these mines, and they are not only clearly using tracks and sprockets and things, but these are specifically using what is very clearly inspired by vertical volute suspension systems, such as found on Sherman tanks. And I think that there is no doubt that this is a very specific reference to chassis of Grants and Lees being used for this exact kind of work. No doubt they came across all of these references and they had to have said, we got to make something that looks at least a little bit like that. Very, very cool. And the attention to detail is great. The only thing I would say is I'm not sure which of these is supposed to be a sprocket and which one's supposed to be an idler. Neither of them seem to have teeth, and I'm not sure which of these is supposed to be the drive wheel. Actually, they do have teeth. They're just on the inside, which is interesting. I'm not sure at what point they mesh with the tracks in that case. So I'm not sure. There's no holes or slots in the tracks for those center teeth on both either idler / sprocket to mesh in with. So I'm not totally sure how those tracks would physically work. So I think with that being said, I'm going to leave it here for this episode of Tank Enthusiast Reacts. If you guys enjoyed, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe like I said at the beginning of the video. I'm not going to rehash everything that I said at the beginning, but do all the fun YouTube stuff. Let me know in the comments what game you guys think I should take a look at next for Tank Enthusiast Reacts. And I really can't wait to hear all of the crazy Warhammer lore that I either missed or things that I got totally wrong in this Tank Enthusiast Reacts. But in the meantime, my name is Hydra320, the guy with 40,000 subscribers, and this has been another video on my channel. Thanks so much for watching. I never quite know how to end things. I'm not good at saying goodbye. More videos will be coming on the way to you soon, I hope. Keep your eyes peeled and go away.